Subscribe for more.
The Man with the Monkeys. Original story. I live in America, but the company I work for recently sent me on a work trip to collaborate with our UK counterparts in London. The trip was straightforward enough. Go to London, learn from workers and managers there, share our practices with them, and bring back ideas and practices to make both sides more efficient. The added bonus? My time off was mine, and I was going to be in London with more than sufficient time to see the sights, and my employer was paying for it all. The dream, right? Well, that's what I thought too. If you've ever been to London as a first-timer, you know how overwhelming everything can be. I live in a relatively large city in the southern US, but London is New York magnitude, and I haven't been to New York either. I drive everywhere I go. In London, public transport is the best and cheapest way to get around. Getting from the airport to central London was easy enough. I found my way to the office building, checked in, made some introductions, and set off for my new home as I got to the office a little late with travel. Off to the London Underground again. During rush hour, no less. Man, they can really pack people into a train there. I get down to the platform for one of the westbound lines as my Airbnb is outside of the city. I know I need to make a change at one underground station to another line, then take a bus for the last leg to the outskirts where I'll be staying. Guess this was a lot cheaper for the company than just getting a hotel downtown. The first train arrives and I have my first station change noted mentally. I pulled up the Airbnb page and was taking a look through the photos and check-in instructions. It's a nice place, edge of town, somewhat remote. Looks like a good middle ground for trips to the city and exploring some more rural areas of England. I look up at the station signal. My station is next. I get off of the train, and this is an older station. Not as populated as the downtown station, but expansively large and a maze to get around. They have signs, but not everything's clear when you're new. Anyhow, I realize I don't have signal underground and can't just map my way to the Airbnb anymore. I close the app beforehand, as I habitually close any apps when I lock my phone. Great. Guess I'm going caveman and need to interpret the maps to determine how to get where I'm going. I put down my bag while I stand there and take a load off while I try to figure out what I'm going to do. One problem. There are hundreds of stations, and just figuring out where I am and where the station I'm trying to reach is has me stumped. The map is an amalgamation of colored lines and zones and looks like a connect the dots challenge. I guess my stupor was visible to others in the station because a sweet middle-aged lady named Alice came up and asked if I need help. Thank God the people of London happen to be very nice so far. I tell her where I want to go, and what do you know? She's headed to the same location. She reminds me to take note on the map and keep my app open in the future as, duh, you don't have internet underground. We walk to the platform, and as we get there, I realize I forgot my bag at the map. My work laptop and cell phone are in there, and I just left it sitting out in the open. My heart sinks, and I race back to the map, and by some miracle, it's still sitting there. Guess London isn't like big cities in the US because I was sure it was going to be gone by now. I make my way back to follow Alice onto the train, and we have some small talk before arriving at the final station. I thank her, we exchange Instagrams so she can share places to visit, and I'm on my way to the bus station. This is where things begin to take a turn. With the internet, I find my bus no problem. If you've never used the City Mapper app, I strongly recommend it. It makes things so much easier. Thanks, Alice. Anyways, I board my bus and Ride to my stop is about 25 minutes away. The bus is pretty full, but I secure a row and fortunately no one sits next to me. I can hear the ramblings of commuters, and I imagine most of them know each other as they ride the same route every day. Everyone seems friendly, but I like to stick to my own and I keep my headphones in to avoid conversation if possible. I doze off after the stress of the stations, and wouldn't you know it, I missed my stop because I had my phone on silent from the short time in the office earlier that day. Yet another travel mistake. On the first day. We're now 7 stops past my stop, and I'm in a bit of a cold sweat. I exclaim to my neighbor that I missed my stop and that this has to be the final mistake I make today. Next logical step, of course, is get off and just order an Uber to be done with it. That's when the older man sitting behind me pipes up. He says the next stop is his and he just lives down the road. He noticed my accent and wanted to be a good English host, so he invited me over for dinner and he was going to make some traditional English food. He said his dish is an old family recipe and would be better than anything I would find in a pub. He even offered to let me stay with him that night or would drive me back to the Airbnb after dinner. At this point, I really just want to go to the Airbnb and pass out, but I do love a good home-cooked meal, and I figure why pass up on a chance at a unique opportunity, so I say sure, I'd be honored to join him. A decision I would later come to regret. The bus pulls up to the stop, and the man introduces himself as Wilfred, and gestures to me to get off first. The lady across the aisle gives me a thin smile, and I smile back. Wilfred and I step off of the bus, and he begins to lead me down the road. The area is fairly remote. The road is lined with driveways every few hundred feet as far as I can see. We walk about a quarter of a mile until we come up to his driveway, chatting about my job and my reason for being there. An old wire fence lines the property and vines grow through it. Trees provide shade and privacy from the road. We walk up the driveway to the home, and Wilfred begins telling me about how he cares for monkeys, and he wants to show me his collection after dinner. This is a bit odd to me, but hey, there are more lions in Texas in private ownership than the rest of the world apparently, so I guess it's not that bizarre. The property is a little rough, but not in horrible shape. Some weeds are unkept, and a broken down and dilapidated car sits on the side of the drive. The house seems older and in need of some repairs, but other than that, I would describe it as quaint. There's a large shed off to the back of the property against some hedges, and that, Wilfred tells me, is where his monkeys are kept. He says they're sick, so he can't keep them in the house with him, but says he has 13 monkeys in cages there. The way he says it makes me a bit uneasy for some reason. And even though I'm a man and can handle myself, I begin to notice just how tall Wilfred is. I'm 6 foot and still he towers over me. I don't know why I didn't notice that before. He sits on a few acres, which I imagine is hard to come by, so the land and home must have been in his family for some time. He invites me in and walks me back to a small second bedroom. He says I can relax here while he prepares the stew, and he'll come get me when it's ready, as he knows I must be tired. I thank him and crack the door. Sitting on the bed, I can tell it's older and the firmness isn't something I would call comfortable. I start to think I'm going to take the ride to the Airbnb after dinner. I'll just say I like to have my personal space, and I'm sure he'll understand. As I sit there reading up on some emails, I feel something brush my shoe at the edge of the bed. Then I feel something tug at my shoelace aggressively. My heart jumps and I reactively pull my feet up onto the bed when over the edge jumps a macaque monkey, maybe a foot tall and 15 pounds in weight. I recoil and jump off the bed in fear, shouting at the monkey. I turned to the door to leave and saw Wilfred filling the door frame. He grabs my shoulder and tells me it's okay. This is his roommate, Charlie. He chuckles at my fear and tells me to relax. Dinner should be done soon, and then he heads back to the kitchen. I very cautiously sit back down, but Charlie watches me carefully. And something in his eyes seems less than friendly. He stares at me for a minute and then jumps down and runs out of the room. I assume to the kitchen. Running through the scenario over and over again, I realize a detail I initially dismissed. Charlie had some dried, deep red goop under his neck, holding his hair still like a hair gel. It looked like he had tried to clean it at some point, but got bored and struggled with getting it off, and gave up. I couldn't tell what it was, but blood began to relay through my mind, and I couldn't clear the thought. And what illness did 13 monkeys have in his garage that was so debilitating they had to stay in a small shelter together with no air conditioning? Were they being fed? What was his plan with them? He never said anything about rescue or rehabilitation. And now that I was thinking about it more, Wilfred gave me a really ill gut feeling. Something about his mannerisms and his comments seemed fake, manufactured. He seemed fake nice. He seemed eager to invite me to the house, and I just realized he was living alone here. Alone with a monkey roommate and 13 monkeys locked in a shed. The scent of the stew from the kitchen crept through the crack of the door and into my nose. The smell was off. Not putrid, but not far from it. It had a sweetness to it. A smell of death. A smell I remember well from finding my uncle dead in his room a few years back with a hole in his head. My sixth sense was screaming at me. Was he eating these sick monkeys? Was he going to feed a Charlie to me, disguised as some authentic English cuisine? Why did Charlie have blood on his fur? And why did he look at me like I was prey? Why did he look through me like I was nothing? Why was Wilfred standing at the door when I jumped off the bed? What was he feeding to the monkeys? Was I going to be food? Why did he pick out a foreigner with no ties to the country to invite over for dinner and stay the night? Everything was piling on and my anxiety was taking hold. And I'm not usually an anxious person. I rushed to the bathroom and locked the door. Am I just freaking out? Why is the smell getting worse? My mind is racing. I can't process what to do. I don't know where I am. I don't know where my Airbnb is. I'm in a foreign land, in a rural area, in Wilfred's house, and Wilfred feels like he's twice my size. And now I'm remembering when I exited the bus, the lady's thin smile. Almost a look of pity in her eyes. What was that about? Why wasn't anyone talking to Wilfred? Was he a hermit? Do they know something I don't? I begin to feel trapped, panicked. I feel like the walls are closing in on my vision. My vertigo is setting in. I hear a ding. My phone. I pull out my phone and none other but Alice is reaching out on Instagram. She asks if I made it to the Airbnb okay and if I found a spot for dinner yet, as she had some recommendations. Thank God for Alice. Twice today she will have saved me. I tell her I'm at a man's house and I feel very uneasy. my sixth sense is firing off and screaming at me to leave. I send her my location and beg her to come get me. She says she's walking out the door and her phone says she'll be there in 15 minutes. I rush out of the bathroom and nervously tell Wilfred I have to leave because I forgot something at work and need to get back downtown. He yells at me to stop and says dinner is almost done. God, that smell. It's worse now. Doesn't he know I can smell it? I manage to get out a no and hurriedly shut the door behind me. I speed walk down the drive to the road and Wilfred yells from the door that he'll drive me after dinner. I tell him I called an Uber and not to worry. I want off the property. As I turn back toward the road, something catches my eye. In the small window of the shed, on the property line by his house, I see two eyes looking out at me. I can't make out if it's a monkey or not, but I make eye contact with the creature. Something is wrong in its gaze. I turn and sprint. I run to the bus stop and message Alice. She's nearly there. I turn to look down the road and Wilfred is walking quickly towards the bus station. Before he's halfway to me, she pulls up and says, "Hey stranger, hop in." I point out Wilfred and tell her to hit it. I explain everything to her, tears in my eyes at this point. So thankful, I tell her she's my English angel. We both agree the man is bizarre, but focus on the road ahead. I'm exhausted and just want to sleep. She gets me to the Airbnb and tells me to rest, and I do just that. After making sure the doors and windows are locked, of course. I couldn't even eat. My stomach was a mess. I pass out almost instantly after my head hits the bed. The next day I take an Uber to work. The fee is horrible and I know it's not sustainable. My employer's only going to pay for the public transport. I begin to think maybe I overreacted. Maybe he genuinely had sick monkeys and maybe he made some traditional stew that just doesn't smell good. After all, I hear haggis is pretty putrid. And I can't stand the smell of vinegar either. I decide to take the public transport home. This time I use the app, and I keep it open. I make it to the bus stop with no issues. The bus pulls up, and I feel a wave of anxiety hit me. But I power through it. Man up, I tell myself. I step up the stairs onto the bus. Instantly, my eyes lock with Wilfred. He's already staring at me. My stomach sinks and I feel ill. I freeze in my tracks. His eyes are cutting into me. There is something wrong with him. What does he want? I can see in him something I can't quite pin down. A sickness. An extravagance. But not the kind of extravagance of wealth and fancy cars. No, some kind of madness. He hides it under his calm persona, but it's there. Something about him is sinister. I don't break eye contact. I want him to know I'm watching him. I want him to know I'm not afraid. But he sees through the veil of my disguise. He's picking apart my confidence. He knows deep down I'm terrified. I see a small smile crack on his lips. I take a seat at the front. I'm constantly watching the aisle behind me from my periphery. Nothing. 3 stops pass. Nothing. My stop is next and we arrive. I hesitate to move, but eventually I gather the courage to get off. I don't even look back on the bus. Just pretend like he isn't there. I don't hear any footsteps behind me. I almost don't hear the bus driver tell me to have a nice day. I step off and hear the bus door close. As the bus pulls off, I can't stop myself. I turn to look at the windows, and peering back, I see a cold pair of eyes. Wilfred is smiling.